All right, well, welcome everyone to this month's Copilot Chronicles event. It's great to have you all with us, and it's great to have our speakers here with us as well. I'm Jason Gumpert from MS Dynamics World. I'm really pleased to be able to help organize this event. And as we get going today, just a couple of housekeeping notes. First, we do welcome your questions on today's session, which will dive into AI news and also our featured theme about data risks and secure AI. But before we do that, we also just want to let you know that we're recording today's event. We'll be making it available to you on demand after the session ends. And yeah, we have two great speakers today, Will Hawkins, who's our regular host, and Stephen Settle. I'll let them both sort of take their own time to introduce themselves. Yeah, let me hand things over to Will to get us started. Welcome, Will.
Thank you so much, Jason. Hey, everybody, happy Friday. I know Friday before a long weekend. I'm sure most people are tapped out, but we're really excited to get to share with you some really great food for thought, definitely some stuff to take into the weekend and I think really sit on when it comes to, this topic. And more importantly, it's just great to be back in the room with all of you. I know it's been a little bit, so very excited to share this really great topic of minimizing data risks and enabling secure AI. I think that's something that we all want, but it's not necessarily that self-explanatory from time to time. So this is going to be kind of a deep dive into setting that foundation up for yourself and your organization so that you can have better success with your AI initiatives and projects and pilots. So if we haven't met before, my name is Will Hawkins. I am the lead data scientist, Azure AI engineer, Fabric engineer over at RightWay AI. We are a people-centered AI engineering and consulting firm. We work with ISVs, Microsoft partners, and end customers to enable AI capabilities within their solutions or within their lines of business. I'm also a Copilot Studio MVP. I have a book as well. Those are a little bit about what I do and where I fit into the ecosystem. I also have a life outside of the office, and that usually entails doing some kind of activity. This is a slide that I've mentioned a few times. Every picture in this is taken in a different province within Canada, so I invite you to try and figure out which ones those are. But yes, I'm a big snowboarder, skateboarder, all kinds of activities. And I'm going to turn it over to Stephen to introduce himself and Ryse Technologies.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Settle. I'm managing partner at Ryse Technologies. Ryse is a Boston-based consulting firm that specializes in building bespoke AI solutions, especially focused on Dynamics 365 for finance and supply chain management. We also do implementations, upgrades, post-go live continuous improvement, and we provide managed services and support. We have two ISV products that we sell for D365. One is called Performance Scout. It is a watchdog application that helps detect and diagnose performance issues in production so you don't have to recreate them in test in order to determine what's wrong. And then we also have a tool called Clone Commander, which is more relevant for this conversation because it's a tool designed to help prepare your data and configurations in non-production environments for D365 to ensure that you're compliant and that your test systems work the way that you expect them to. Thanks, Will.
Yeah, awesome to have you on, Stephen, and welcome. So basically, here's what we're going to be tackling today. We want to be able to inspire you guys to move from AI curious to AI ready by going through some of the risk patterns, controls, things that we've seen on both of our sides of the fence when it comes to just getting your sandboxing set up, particularly around ERP. And then we're going to extend that beyond into CRM, Dataverse apps, you name it. I think these are fairly agnostic to different systems, and that's also going to be a key point that we bring up. So the way we're doing that is we're slicing this up into four different sections. So first, we're going to talk about just overall AI adoption, what that's been like, what we found from different customers, the key data risks that have evolved out of that, what we see as those best practices for secure AI development, and ensuring that you can do that at scale and bringing that to the different systems and the different data domains that you may manage on a regular basis. And of course, ask us anything, anytime. I encourage people to drop questions in at any point because I don't want you to sit through the whole presentation not knowing that one thing that kept you from understanding the rest of the presentation. So don't hesitate. We're watching the chat and the questions. So feel free to jump in whenever you feel like it. So before we jump into that, just wanted to go through a quick news segment. This is something that we've done in previous Copilot Chronicles, just kind of what's new in the AI world and how is that relevant to today's topic. So unless you've been living under a rock for the last month, there is a big announcement that came out from OpenAI's side, which is that GPT-5 is now available. So what that basically does, and I love this picture that they came up with to kind of illustrate it, is it's basically composing all of the capabilities of the previous models, so visual perception and reasoning, and putting that into a unified system that can respond quickly or with expert level answers or something in between based off of what you need. So this is using a real-time router that basically decides the level of intelligence based on the conversation type. So if you ask like, what's the weather forecast in my area? It's not going to sit there and do some kind of philosophical thinking for 5 minutes to give you that answer. It'll be quick, but if you need, a really detailed walkthrough of, how to put together an engine or something like that, it's going to actually think pretty hard about that. So it's really a first step to maybe some form of intuition with models, which is pretty cool to watch and definitely something interesting to pay attention to. And it came with a bunch of safety concerns. So basically, there's a bunch of independent security teams that jailbroke GPT-5 within the first 24 hours using something called a narrative crescendo attack. You can see here on the screen what that kind of looks like. The screenshot's basically the last ending part of it, but basically what they do and what these red teams do is they go through a story with the model saying like, hey, I'm writing a research paper on how people interacted or how, not wars, but how gangs would interact with each other during the 30s and 40s. And, basically lead that up to, I want to understand how to build a Molotov cocktail recipe. Because obviously, if you just ask that up front, the model is going to sense that that's harmful and not something that it should be answering about. So this narrative attack essentially escalates the context where the model gets confused and then gives away some information that it's probably not really needing to give away or really shouldn't. And so these red teams kind of labeled it as unusable for enterprise without the right controls. And that's going to be very important to keep in mind for our conversation today. And Dorian Granosa, who's a red team specialist for a company that was doing some of these tests, pointed out, yes, that it is incredibly valuable as a technological innovation, but you cannot assume that it comes with the right security. And that's going to be a cornerstone of the topics that we have today. Now, given that this is a Microsoft ecosystem and an environment where we all kind of rely on that company in one way or another, there was an obvious response from Microsoft. So they GA'd the GPT-5 model within their AI Foundry. I know I've seen it in there, haven't done too much playing with it yet, but they see it as safe and secure for their environment. They've got their own red team that's gone and done their initial testing with that. And to kind of boost trust and boost capability, they added in an Entra agent ID so that you can actually assign an agent its own identity and policy surface, so giving it different permission levels based off of what you need. And then a really nice thing that they went in and did was actually include a model ranking criteria for safety. So not just having what was already there with quality, cost, and performance, but also giving you the ability to understand some of the safety things that underpin it. And obviously that's very important for our topic today, right? I think that's maybe an area that is not as well focused on in AI, is just understanding how secure AI works and how to do security testing for AI. I know we're all very excited about it and all the amazing things that it's doing today, but there is obviously a lot of responsibility that comes with that. So that brings us to kind of the main idea and thought for today's session, which is safe by design sandboxes are the fastest path to AI value. And I want you to sit on that as we go through today's presentation. And if you take anything away from it, it's probably going to be this, since that is kind of, really at the heart of where we're seeing a lot of customers and different associates in the ecosystem at large have a difficult time with things because prototyping, and I'm sure this is a familiar stat to some, often never leaves the lab because there's a lot of things that people don't realize up front, and that makes it a difficult wagon to pull as you're going through into making this a reliable and hardened system. So in order to do that, let's kind of take a step back and look at, the adoption trends and data risks that have emerged in the last year and a bit. I know we're all pretty familiar with how AI adoption has skyrocketed, but maybe not as familiar as to why that's happened. This graphic may seem a little confusing, but I'm going to do my best to walk you through what this all means. So what you're seeing there on the left is a graph that illustrates what's called the collapse of the prediction cost. So prediction cost is basically the cost associated with getting the output of an AI model, right? An AI output can look like an image, it can look like a piece of text, it can be a number. Those are all commonly referred to as predictions or inferences when you're doing any kind of statistical modeling. And we've seen that, right? With the GPT model, that's driven down the cost. You're getting sentences or paragraphs back for pennies on the dollar when you're running it through an API. So the actual cost of running a model has become a lot less expensive. What does that mean? Well, that means you can create more laps in your feedback loop. Other really important thing is now, because these models are more accessible, right? You don't have to be a data scientist or a machine learning engineer to know how to use them. That's created a wider surface area for people to participate. So you have more experts coming to the table that are not technically fluent in that stuff and adding in their expertise and input. So that's creating, more richness in the ability to use data and leverage it within an AI model. Those combined with the ability to do this iteration much more quickly is creating shorter laps, which is creating a richer data set. So really what the main kind of driver of why AI and Copilot solutions have been in such demand is because the cost of innovation has dropped significantly as a result of these models being able to crunch numbers faster, get answers faster, do analysis faster, and really kind of become a new conduit for being able to do being able to grow business output and just produce output overall, right? So main thing to take away is that because the cost has dropped and you're able to do a lot of these other things, that's shifted the focus away from the quality of the model. So what does that mean? That means that there's a new bottleneck, or maybe not necessarily a new bottleneck, but the bottleneck isn't where you think it is when it comes to why these AI projects are not as successful as they're painted to be. It's not necessarily about can the model do it, it's about what are we powering it with, right? EY did a study where they found most leaders are saying that they aren't really investing in their data infrastructure the way that they would like to. And only 36% felt that they actually have invested in the ways that they want with their data quality, access, and governance. And a lot of companies are seeing that. I know with customers that I've worked with, by putting these AI pilots into place, you get to see a lot of things that you didn't realize were issues with the data. Like, oh, this person has access to this secure file that they needed access for a week, but now they've had access for years. Like, that's not that's not good. And this is becoming a trend. I mean, MIT did a study and they found that 95% of these generative AI projects are failing to deliver any kind of value, right? And I know in another, I believe it was a Gartner or a Forbes study that I read, they went through 1,000 different AI agent solutions, and the ones that were actually considered agentic AI were like maybe 1 to 5%, like very, very few and far between. And a lot of it comes down to, I've tried to explain this to customers and clients recently. Like we all, I'm sure most are aware, to get to 80% on a project takes about 20% of your effort, and to get to 100%, from 80 to 100%, is where 80% of that effort lives. And this is, why sandboxing effectively is super important, because if you're not putting the right data infrastructure and controls, as you're going to see in a bit when we talk about anonymization and pseudonymization, I think I said that right. That's really what causes those projects to be successful, is having those right things in place. So that's really the bottleneck that we're starting to see be part of the challenge that customers are facing, and something that we're hoping to address with this presentation today. And I think an interesting mindset shift that needs to take place is that good governance does not mean you have a safe AI environment, right? A lot of companies have built their data governance framework around reporting, and AI is doing a lot more than reporting, right? Especially now that we have MCP servers and agents doing all kinds of wacky things, right? It's changing records, it's performing CRUD operations. It's actually changing the data that users are seeing, right? That's part of why we've designed it that way. And what data governance framework has been prepared for that? That's not something that was part of the initial design principles of it. And so you may still have great data quality, but you might still be exposed to a lot of these risks that we're going to be looking at here in a bit. So we'd like to invite you. There's absolutely no shame. Please, if you have ever used real production data in a dev and test environment, feel free to drop it in the chat. I know this is something that Stephen has faced from time to time, and I know I've seen it with customers as well. So, if you feel like that's something you want to share about, feel free to drop it in the questions or the chat. But let's actually kind of talk a little bit about what happens when you're going in and pointing at production. So again, one thing to keep in mind is AI solutions are very iterative in their cases. I know today actually I was working with a customer, and the first couple of times we've asked the AI something, it's like half thought about the right answer and then it won't, and then we go in and look at the logs and we're like, oh, that's why, like we assigned the context to the metadata rather than assigning it to the actual conversation history, and that's part of why it may lose its memory, right? So if you think about that process, if you do that with production data, that's there's just going to be so many messes that you create by trying to iterate on live stuff that is a source of truth that really shouldn't be touched in that way. And obviously that comes with versioning, right? I don't know how many are familiar with MLOps and LLM ops frameworks, but that's going to be something we point to a bit later, where you're continuously improving that model, even if it's perfect the first time. Like if you have it, just read off of your HR policy documentation and it gets it right 10 out of 10 times, that's great, but that's not a permanent condition. That will change as your data change and as the reality that it's a part of changes at the same time. You can't create what if scenarios. You're just dealing with what is, right? You can't break it. That's a huge part of red teaming, is actually going in and running adversarial tests against your model to see, what breaks it? What questions can I ask? Or what things can I ask it to do that breaks it? Because you want to find that before a hacker does or a nefarious user, right? Those are the things you need to be using as part of your hardening layer, which we'll talk about a bit later. Obviously, this can create PII exposure, IP leaks. If you are familiar with regulations, the EU AI Act is not kind to people that don't consider this stuff, as well with the CCPA. I know in Canada we have ADA as well, the AI Data Act. So you're just putting yourself at harm's way for relatively no reason. And I know Steven's got some stories to share about that when it comes to developer liability and exposure.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that, it's tempting, first of all, to just want to get started when we talk about trying to develop a new AI solution. And when we want to jump straight in, we kind of often make two really big mistakes that I will hope to convince you are mistakes and that you should not try to do them. First of all, some people connect directly to their production data. This is a big mistake for several reasons that Will has already mentioned. You can't manipulate your production data in order to establish what if scenarios. And part of your process needs to be testing for expected results. You should be able to, in your AI solution, expect a particular result, set up the conditions that should cause that result to happen, and then see what happens and evaluate that outcome. You can't do this with production data. So first of all, get your data out of production and put it somewhere that you can actually manipulate and play with it. Additionally, if your AI is at all trying to make any sort of manipulation to that data, if it is attempting to record anything, if it's attempting to log information, anything like this, production is kind of a non-starter. So let's take our data out of production and put it somewhere where we can actually do development, a development environment. But once it gets there, we're not done, right? We have to make sure that that data is secure and that the sensitive stuff like this PII information or like GDPR related information, this has to be secured in a way that is not going to leak. And the example that I wanted to give related to this is we had a client who came to us because they had been working with an offshore development team to build their D365 landscape. And they gave that development team copies of their production database in order to do their development and testing. This is a standard thing. Most companies need to be able to do this. The developers need access to that data. But the data was not anonymized. It was not masked. It was not at all obfuscated. And a malicious actor saw that development company, the offshore team, as being a particularly vulnerable attack surface, and they hacked them, and they gained access to their data through that company, and they used the data that they were able to glean out of their ERP system in order to spear phishing, to perform a spear phishing campaign and socially engineer members of the internal staff in order to convince them to install ransomware and to make payments to unapproved and unauthorized vendors. Uh, this is the kind of scenario that we need to absolutely avoid. And I know that it costs a little bit of time and money in order to get everything set up in order to prevent this, but it's really worth it because the one time that this happens to you, it can be disastrous.
Yeah, it's the you know, there's this concept in economics called prospect theory where we often overweight events that are less likely to happen, but underweight events that are more likely to happen. Like most people are worried about, dying on a plane when it crashes, but they won't wash their hands. And I feel like this is very similar where most people aren't checking their P's and Q's and really, taking a responsible approach to this, and they're opening up vulnerabilities that will be exploited, without the proper discourse. So obviously this comes with common scenarios. What are people needing to look out for, Stephen?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I mean, look, this is it's not a problem until it's a problem, and then it's a really big problem, right? And we
Yeah.
definitely don't want to end up in a situation where, especially if you're regulated by some government entity, where you could be facing severe legal consequences as a result of not securing your data. But there's a lot of different ways that that data could be failed to be secured. One of the ways that we commonly see is people using unsecure locations to store backups long term. So you want to treat essentially every copy of your data as being highly sensitive, right? If you have, for example, a location on your network that is storing backups, that location needs to be secured. It needs to be the case that a small, limited group of people have access to that location. You should know exactly who has access to it, and when. It should not be the kind of thing that every person in your organization can just reach out to and access. The next thing that can potentially cause this kind of leak, we've already talked about a little bit. This is just copying data from production into another environment without first obfuscating or masking any of that data. That can expose very sensitive information to people who don't explicitly need it. You should treat your data as being on a need to know basis. Individuals who need access to the unperturbed data should be using that data for some production process and not for development. If you can get away with using some anonymized version of your data for your development process, you should attempt to do so. Next one's a good one. This is shadow AI and unsanctioned tools. This is a big deal. So I think a lot of organizations, we're seeing this all the time. A lot of organizations don't realize that their team members may be implementing AI tools without their knowledge. And a lot of those tools do use the conversations that you have with it as a part of their training material for the next iteration of their model. And so anything that you share with one of these models, unless you explicitly know that that data is secure and yours, you should treat as becoming publicly available information. And if you are not controlling, and you may not know that your employees are doing this, this is an opportunity to leak quite a lot of very sensitive data to a publicly available model that may then become a part of the next generation of that model's fine tuning. So you really need to be careful and aware of this. And a lot of people don't realize that when they're sharing some sensitive information with an AI model, that they could be accidentally exposing very sensitive information that their company would really care about.
Yeah, I mean, how many people do you know? And I'm sure I've encountered it a few times where they're going into ChatGPT and just copying and pasting a data set and saying, do these manipulations to it. Didn't change any client names, didn't do anything like that. And I know from my experience, a lot of them haven't looked in the settings to see that there's a data control lever that you just turn off, and then the model's not going to get trained on your information, right? So it's not directly in your face, and that can easily, create a lack of awareness where people just expose things unnecessarily.
Totally right. And then, GPT-6 comes out and some random person asks it, what were the, revenue figures in North America for Domino's Pizza in 2024? And it knows the answer with surprising accuracy. this is an example. That didn't really happen, but that's the kind of thing that you should be really worried about, right? Because it will know the answer because someone already told it, right? And it's now part of its general information. So this is a very high risk scenario. We want to be really careful about this, and we want to control and teach our people not to just implement their own AI tools, and especially not to just hand away careful or delicate company information that may be proprietary to these AI tools. And here's the next really big one. Prompt injections and engineering. So a lot of organizations are really excited to implement new AI tools and think about security as kind of a second step. And instead of putting up hard walls where their AIs are partitioned in a way where the AI does not have access to the data that it should not have access to for its particular context, they put up soft walls. And they explain to the AI as a part of its prompt that it should not share specific sensitive information with people who aren't supposed to have access to it. But this is not the right approach, right? This is a very dangerous thing to do. You should assume that if an AI model has access to sensitive data, that it will share it, even if you tell it not to. You should put up hard walls. You should say that this AI is going to use Entra, for example, to do deep research and chain of thought processing in order to access files in the context of the user who's using it, and not as a service account that has access to everything and then tries to softly implement security after the fact. This does not work. It's very easy to circumvent. A lot of people have figured it out. Will's already kind of given some examples of how ChatGPT 5 is particularly vulnerable to this. So please don't do it that way. Really put up some walls. Think about this a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you think about, the number one coding language in the world now is natural language, right? And so if you're relying on your system prompt as your one and only line of defense for ensuring that you've, coded it in a way that it achieves and protects the information that you want, I mean, people are
Mhm.
putting malicious prompts and images or doing this narrative crescendo stuff, and it's taking down some of the most secure or potentially secure platforms in the world. So, you mean if you think about what they're going through, it of course it's got to be something that you work with because it's not on the AI to for its own liability. It's going to be on you. Like if it leaks sensitive information, nobody's going to blame the AI. They're going to blame the person that either developed it or the company that didn't take the right steps to secure it effectively.
Yeah, that's so right. Really well said. This next scenario is very much related to the product backup scenario. A lot of times with our AI solutions, we're logging all kinds of information, including data and exactly what was said. That also needs to be secured. You need to make sure that that is treated as being potentially highly sensitive information, even though we might not know what is going to go into it in advance. Uh, they can be vulnerable to individuals who have access to it that can then discern very sensitive information out of it if it's not treated as being highly sensitive. And then this last point, I really do want to spend. I just want to make sure that this point really gets across. I think that there's an assumption sometimes that anonymizing specific kinds of master data is enough to completely anonymize a data set. And that's not always true. You need to really think this through, right? Because it could be the case. Look, for example, HIPAA in the US has data advice on how to properly anonymize data. They say things like you can't just anonymize the person's name. You also must anonymize their social security number. You must anonymize their phone number. You must anonymize their address. You must anonymize several different things that could be used to de-anonymize that person after the fact, so that there's no way to reconstruct your data once it has been obfuscated.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is now that these tools exist, they can be used for both good and bad reasons, right? So the ability for data to be re-identified by leveraging large language models has only, grown in capability. So now it's just about finding more advanced ways to protect ourselves against that. Anything
We
else
need
you
to
want
be
to
at least as we need to be at least as creative as our attackers, right? So
add?
we should, think about how could people use our data in a deconstructive way or in a way that is malicious, and to try to stay one step ahead. We have to be at least as good at this as they are, or risk exposing very sensitive information to a potential attacker.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, we're not trying to scare you straight, but maybe we have. But we do have
All
some
right.
best practices and some solutions that will help make this process a lot easier. So we hope that, now having the awareness of what you're looking for and why it's important, we can step into, what's really the ways we found to be the most effective in assuring that you're prototyping with peace of mind. I think that's the most important thing in this. So, Stephen, these are some common strategies or techniques that you find effective.
Totally. So I was just talking about the first one, which is, anonymizing your data. So to strip identifiers, and again, going that extra mile, not just randomizing or masking a particular account's name, but the identifiable information that may lead back to getting that name if you have these other individual data points. Um, this comes at a cost, right? Because it means that traceability, especially for like your development scenarios, may suffer in that regard. But it's worth it, right, to anonymize your data and have consistently anonymized data. The pseudo-anonymization is kind of the traceable version of anonymizing your data. This is essentially having some sort of a hash or encryption approach where we start with a particular value, we apply some sort of algorithm to it, we get a value out of that that an attacker cannot descramble, cannot de-anonymize. But we can internally with the right tools, right? And this is a smart thing for us to do under very specific circumstances, but it adds a lot of complexity, and it might not be right for everyone. But in the cases where you desperately do need this, this is the right way to do it. Now, there's also certain cases where you might have, for example, field level masking requirements, right? So, uh, in the case of like an email address, it may be important in your data that the data looks like an actual email address, even if those email addresses are anonymized, right? They should probably follow the format of having a username at domain dot top level domain, right? This will make it possible for us to send emails or at least test our email system, but not have the individual's personally identifiable information or accidentally have an email address in a development system that might actually receive some sort of test message. This is something that we absolutely want to avoid, right? um, the next really important thing to consider when you're copying your production data down into a development environment is, especially on the D365 side, when you start that environment up, if you have endpoints that are configured that are pointing to other production systems, like for example, if your D365 environment may be integrating with Salesforce.com, you might have a custom connector in there, and it might have the endpoint details stored in your production database. This can be a big problem because as soon as you start testing some process in your sandbox environment, it may start sending messages to that production instance of Salesforce.com and could destroy your data. So you really want to make sure that you're careful about preparing your configurations, including endpoints, so that they don't accidentally communicate with production systems outside of production. And then finally, tokenization. One of the best things that you can do to anonymize your data is hand the responsibility off to a third party. With credit cards, this is something that's relatively simple to do. Clearinghouses can anonymize your credit card information that you have stored for individual customers. You can take that credit card, give it to them, they give you a token back. That token is useless outside of the context of your production environment. And so there's no way for someone to steal that data and use it in a malicious way. It's very secure, and now it's their problem to keep that data secure. It's not on you.
Amazing. So obviously we want to be able to do this in some kind of automated fashion or, a way that's, scalable, right? You're not kind of just picking these out and hoping you find the best fit. There's a way of doing this from a streamlined fashion. So can you talk a little bit about your
Yeah,
experience with that?
totally. So, the what we've seen up until this point is kind of a mix of two approaches. organizations that are preparing their non-production environments manually will construct long checklists of steps that they must do to prepare those environments. And those manual steps can sometimes be quite arduous, right? They can take hours, maybe even days to complete. And that often has the effect of being too cost prohibitive, right? And some organizations will allow their non-production environments to become quite stale, which makes them very difficult to work with. It makes development and testing slow. It makes it hard to recreate scenarios that people are seeing in production. This is not ideal, right? So we want to be able to copy that data from production down without having these really long checklists to prepare that data. And so building some sort of automation to prepare your data is really, really smart. You should do this. You should consider what approach you want to take in order to prepare your non-production data. If you can allocate the funds necessary in order to do something like this. Now, once you've built scripting that helps you to configure those non-production environments and mask and obfuscate that sensitive data, you have to maintain it, right? And these scripts will rot over time if you don't maintain them. They become incompatible with newest versions of applications, including and especially D365. As new versions come out, you have to maintain those scripts in order to continue to be compatible with the latest versions of D365. And although on the D365 side, there's not a lot of third-party tools that do this, our product Clone Commander does do that. We keep it up to date with the latest version of D365. We've got a number of recipes that we maintain for common scenarios, and it automatically executes and configures your non-production environments as soon as they start. It's cheap at $1,000 per month, and it's very easy to implement. So we recommend finding tools like this for your other environments, including environments that are not D365 for finance and operations. And if you have an interest in seeing our product, then please do reach out to us. We're very happy to show you. If you don't use our product, you should come up with a way to script this on your own. So yeah, going a little bit further into extending governance beyond reporting, one thing that I definitely wanted to just point out here is that it's really important that we design a policy in advance, right? That we want to have a plan before we ever export data from production in the first place. We don't want to be reactive. We want to be proactive. We want to come up with a part of our application lifecycle management that includes especially planning for copying data down into development environments. Now, one thing that you should consider as a part of that design, as part of that policy, is that dev and test users should only have access to data that they absolutely must have in order to complete their job. Consider all of your production data to be on a need-to-know basis. And if they don't explicitly need to know it, then you're just exposing additional information that might not be necessary and adding to your potential attack surface.
Yeah, I mean the amount of people that like this seems so obvious, but the amount of people that aren't doing it is kind of crazy, right?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's common, and this is a part of the reason that we're seeing so many customers complaining that they have either had some sort of major data leak or, have accidentally exposed information to an attacker, right? Something like this. So, yeah, it's really important that you consider all of this as a part of your normal process. Now, of course, when you're copying data down from production, it's a really good idea to make sure that whatever your process is, it has, complete logs. Who did what, when, and that log should be immutable, right? It shouldn't be possible for a bad actor to go into that log and change it after the fact. We should know precisely what was done and when. And then from a consistency perspective, it's very important that we try to look at our data in a holistic way, not just in the context of an individual system. You might have customer data that lives in D365, but you should also think about the customer data that lives in your other systems. It might be in Salesforce.com. It might be in some project planning tool. It might be in some other places. And you should treat it similarly in those other environments. If you're going to copy those environments down from production into lower tier environments, you should have a similar plan that's consistent with how you're treating your data in any of those systems. And then finally, if you can, and not everybody can, but it's a really good idea if you can. You should set up some monitoring to detect when somebody does not follow the rules, when somebody circumvents the process that you've put in place for preparing that data, right? So AI-assisted scanning for sensitive fields and logs, vector stores, and agent prompts. This is a smart way to kind of ensure that something is watching and waiting for a violation of protocol and reporting on it so that you can take immediate actions to correct it.
Yeah, I mean, because not everybody's going to have a dedicated QA person that especially can manage a bunch of different environments. So the more you can kind of just give yourself little alerts and notifications to keep ties on things, that really helps, especially when you're prototyping, because it's definitely possibly common to just kind of let something sit in your dev and test and forget about it, and months later you're finding out that you're running up some kind of bill, or it's creating all kinds of vulnerabilities within your system. And that's just headaches nobody wants. So those are definitely things worth
Totally right.
exploring, especially within your governance framework as you evolve it, right? And particularly with AI models, I think one thing that's really interesting and fun when it comes to sandboxing with them is this notion of, how well are we representing what the model is going to face in the real world, right? Like, even before LLMs, you were doing, machine learning was training a model, right? Like when you think about the concept of training, you are preparing it to live in production. That's kind of the main idea. You want it to be a functional part of your system. And a lot of the philosophy and design of how to do that is often omitted, and you end up with models that are completely useless, right? So the title of this slide is called "Don't Train on Cats Alone" because there's a good excerpt from a book called "Machine Learning Yearning" by Andrew Ng, who's one of the godfathers of AI, and he talks about, let's say you're creating an image recognition model and you are trying to distinguish the difference between cats and dogs, just as a beginner level test. If you go out on Google and you scrape every single image of a cat and dog you can find, train the model on it, woohoo, you trained a model. Now go and take a picture of a cat that's upside down. It's probably going to think it's a dog. Why is that? Because the model actually hasn't seen the real world. It's seen nice, pretty pictures of cats and dogs, possibly ones that are AI generated, so it's not even looking at real images anymore. And so its understanding and concept of what it's expected to do in reality is skewed because it's kind of like it read the wrong book before the test. Like it just doesn't really understand it that well. And so that's where in sandboxes, it's really important to create what's called a dev set, where you're basically taking this anonymized production data and curating, really what the model is going to face in a real environment. Like I know when I started with reinforcement learning algorithms with digital twins, we'd actually create a simulation using a tool like AnyLogic, where you're creating, this is exactly how the business function occurs, and this is the day-to-day, activities that will happen. And that was important because you needed to give the model space to learn a policy or learn a path to success based off of real world conditions that it'll face. So that's really where you see the value of having a really great sandbox, because you can actually structure it in a way where you're giving models not just the ability to become an asset that you use, but become optimized for your particular business scenario, for your particular situation, and that's where you see those models really start to take form and deliver value. So now, obviously, sandboxing is great, and we want to do that at a really effective level, and we want to get those things into production. And as we mentioned near the beginning, right, that's where a lot of AI projects die. Just flat out, I know there's been tons of different stats thrown around. It's all usually pointing to majority die in the lab. And that usually comes down to just not having a good promotion process, right? So by starting with this safe sandbox, you're giving yourself kind of that playground or that incubation capability to create without really worrying about some of the data concerns, of course. But more importantly, you're giving yourself an effective way of deciding whether a model is ready to be moved up to something better, right? So when you're going from sandbox to POC, it's really, is this something that functions, like functionally can produce value, but something that you want to try and break because you want to get a really good handle on, yeah, maybe it works for these 10 queries or these 10 tasks, but maybe it's going to crash after that, right? And so that's really where you see those promotional gates come in is, is this something that I feel or something that I know is capable of answering, 1 to 5 questions or do some task, like whatever your arbitrary kind of minimum value prop is, can I hit that with this tool? Maybe I promote to POC. And then, as I mentioned, minimum viable product. I mean, to me, that fits more into having automated pipelines that are versioning it. It's capable of handling regression tests, and it's been properly vetted in some way with quality assurance. So really kind of stepping up into that more robust system. And then that's really when you can move things into your production environment because you've created that funnel of success in other terms, because by taking that approach with your sandbox environment, inherently you're creating a really thoughtful way of designing a promotion system for these tools. And it doesn't have to, it doesn't have to go all the way up and then you're done and you can call it a day. I think that really fits into the arrival myth that a lot of people, or arrival fallacy that we face as humans, where we think that once we put something in production, it's done, it's completed. We never have to touch it again. You're going to find with these solutions that you encounter data drift or models change, right? There's going to be variables where the system may have worked in production for a couple months, but needs some fine tuning after that. And it's okay to go back down that ladder and work on a few things and then bring it back up, right? It's kind of like taking your car to the shop. Like it's not going to work all the time anyways. It's got to do some maintenance of some kind. So, kind of intentionally approaching that in that way is going to help you feel a lot more successful and see those results. Because I've found with customers, when you look at all the amazing AI tools that are out there and you feel like you're behind the times because you see all this stuff in production, it's a lot like social media. You're only seeing 5% of things. Like you're not seeing all the times they've broken the solution or the amount of things that just stop working for random reasons. Like I know I use an AI project management tool for my business, and I think one day it randomly just Google stopped working for 5 hours, so it just didn't work. I couldn't use the thing. There was no real like update or notification that's given out as to what occurred and why. I think most times it's just sometimes stuff breaks. That's how it goes. So having this process and being okay with things going up and down in that process really helps you stay on top of managing those risks effectively and getting the results that you want to see from your AI solutions. Obviously, this is producing a lot of business impact. The Australian found that mature AI governance and taking an intentional approach to prototyping is just leading to faster approvals. It makes sense, right? You got a system that's well thought out. People are going to look at the well thought out policy and be like, okay, somebody took their time. I can trust this. Just makes perfect sense. And like we talked about, this continuous training aspect, by having that baked into your CI/CD and cycles, that's where you see that iteration happen a lot faster and the models improve a lot faster. I mean, how did we go from GPT 3.5 to GPT 5, in a couple of years? It's this process that's really allowed that to flourish. And then on the flip side, you're seeing where that doesn't work out when companies don't have that high quality data or the right system for it. They're spending lots of money making sure that that's the fix. I know I used to always joke as a data scientist about 80% of my job was just fixing data sets and making them something that could work with a model, and that kills a lot of time and dollars. So that's a really important thing to think about. And then that's where you're seeing solutions like Fabric be really effective, because companies and people are spending a lot less time refactoring or reworking or finding the information and stitching together all these data points to make something work. They're kind of just starting with a fresh slate and being very intentional about it. So that's really where you see that stuff start to take off from sandbox to production. If you have any questions, by the way, just feel free to drop them in the chat. I know we're going pretty fast. This is our last section, so if you have any comments or thoughts, feel free to drop them in. But obviously, I think it's pretty apparent that we've talked about this, yes, from a finance and supply chain perspective and ERP, but it extends well beyond this, right? Like that's very important, especially when it comes to the fact that you're dealing with these problems in other systems as well, like the data leakage, the PII, the logs not being set up right, connecting to the wrong endpoint. These are all things that can happen in any environment, right? And so that's where taking this sandbox approach and doing it effectively with your ERP data, or even if you're starting with a CRM or a Salesforce or whatever, you can really build that into something that's effective for all your data sources. I personally have always had a tough time understanding how people look at different data sources as different things. Like I get the business domain of ERP and the business domain of CRM may seem like different things, but they are still rows in a table. They are still relational databases at the end of the day. And so they should be all treated from that perspective. And particularly because you may have integration testing that fails as a result of not having these systems synced up correctly, right? Like if your ERP has got one view of a customer list and your sales has a different view, I mean, the model can give you the best answer it can, but if it doesn't have the right data points or the correct source of truth, what's the point? It's just not a valuable tool anymore, right? So having those approaches kind of established across the enterprise is probably the most effective way to make good use of the tools that we're sharing with you today. And then something to kind of explore for future references, as we've talked about, is really unifying that masking map and taking this sandbox approach into something like Fabric, where you're leveraging it for kind of all your platforms. Now, you may not necessarily be able to automate every single component of that, but at least having that standardized set of rules and anonymization techniques and pseudonymization approaches, and having that in a central place for people to leverage and access for their different systems is a really effective way of creating what I like to call a centralized AI platform advantage, because often when you're prototyping, a lot of what happens is HR goes and plays with a Copilot and finance works on a forecasting model, and those never get connected, which is mind-blowing because the network effect of learning why this model didn't work or why this one worked effectively needs to be centralized, because you can probably reproduce those data sets for multiple situations. Like you're just changing the domain of the data. So that's really where having that infrastructure built around this concept of effective prototyping and sandboxing is going to help not only how you do things in your ERP world, but every world that you kind of fit into within your different business systems. So before we move on, Stephen, do you have any other thoughts, comments that you want to add?
Yeah, just kind of expounding on that a little bit because I think you really nailed it. But the idea that your data has a lot of overlap between these systems in a lot of ways that they can be usefully interpreted through different lenses. They also have specializations, and if we take just the data from ERP or we take just the data from CRM, we're missing a big component of the total picture. And especially when we're talking about things like AIs that can do subjective analysis and look at big picture, this can be incredibly valuable. We might be specifically interested in a question that's related to CRM, but the context of what's going on with this customer in ERP may give us a complete picture that we don't otherwise have access to. And so it's really a good idea to talk about doing this kind of solution in some sort of married, unified environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's really that single source of truth is probably the greatest asset that you can have for a business, for an AI solution, for everything. So creating the containers to make that happen is definitely a worthwhile investment. All right, we are in the home stretch. So just to kind of recap everything that we discussed here today, of course, as we kind of kicked it off, safe by design sandboxes are the fastest path to AI value. We hope, that you can see exactly why that's the case, right? By having the right container set up for AI innovation to occur. You're checking all your responsible AI boxes, you're checking all your trustworthy AI boxes, you're creating, effective data security for your copying between dev, test, and prod, and you're just creating systems that by default are secure and effective. And that just gives a different peace of mind when you're trying to prototype, and especially for companies now that are trying to prototype under pressure, because it's a crazy world out there with AI, and you got lots of different boards putting pressure on people to get stuff out into market. And of course, that's important, and there's relevancy to that. But if you don't take the time to really set up your foundation and your environment for success, you're just going to end up like the other 95% that are building solutions that don't produce value. So that's kind of the main things. Again, having that framework for promotion is important, and then making sure that these systems are enterprise-wide by default, ensuring that they're going beyond your ERP to whatever other connections that you want to make. All of that is going to make it super effective. And of course, automation. You can throw that in a bunch of different ways. As Stephen pointed out, there's tools that exist out there, including their own. And so feel free to explore what's available from a tool perspective. So with that, Stephen, do you have other thoughts before we continue on?
Yeah, just the additional takeaways that we definitely want to make sure we drive home, which is that you copying that production data down into an environment where you're going to play with it is absolutely key to your process, and you should make sure that that's a normal part of your SDLC or ALM. But then, take the extra step and protect that data, right? Don't make it just readily available to anyone just because they potentially need an environment to work with relatively up-to-date information. Data is need to know. Protect your data, especially your sensitive data, and don't just readily hand it out. Keep in mind that your development teams may be subject to attack. And if they don't explicitly need access to a piece of information that is particularly sensitive, don't give it to them.
Absolutely. Great. Well, we've got a couple minutes left, so we've put together short knowledge check quiz. Feel free to drop the letter in the chat or in the questions tab. There's no there's no grading to this. You don't get any particular bonus points, but you do get bragging rights. So first question, why isn't good governance for reporting enough for deploying your AI copilots? So kind of like we talked about a bit earlier, you've got those standard governance frameworks that people are using to kind of implement their AI solutions, but where does that fall short? Curious what you guys think.
Yeah, please use the questions block to put in your answers if you want to offer a guess here. I have my guess, but let's see if anyone else chimes in.
All right, you guys can drop in your letter for that. The answer is B. Because AI is interacting with full records, logs, connectors, manipulating data, doing different things, that's kind of creating a whole new dimension and paradigm for governance, right? And so that's why reporting is not really enough anymore, because we're going way beyond reporting with what we're doing with AI today. So hopefully that was the answer you were thinking of, Jason, and hopefully that's what others were thinking as well. All right, next one. What is the main advantage of automation tools like Clone Commander for sandbox refreshes? Is it they improve the chatbot user experience? Is it about eliminating the need for masking or tokenization? Is it about reducing refresh time? Or is it, automatically training Copilot models? Let's see what everybody thinks.
I do have my guess. All right.
Yeah, was it C?
It was C, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so in case you're still processing it, it mainly reduces the refresh time from hours to minutes, freeing up sprint capacity and ensuring your audits are set up correctly, right? It's reducing the human error in the equation. Exactly, Cynthia. So that's a good thing to just help minimize all the risk involved. Then finally, if customer emails are masked differently in ERP and sales environments, what risk does this create? Kind of talked about it here near the end. Is it users may lose their email logins? Is it integration testing is not as effective? Is it Copilot models failing to load properly? Or is tokenization not being able to reverse as a result of that? All right, we'll let people throw their answers in, but in case you're still thinking about it, it's the integration testing, right? Obviously, like we mentioned here at the end, the single source of truth is arguably one of the most important valuable propositions. So you definitely want to, yeah, exactly, Lucas, it's B. So you want to make sure that you're doing this holistically across your environments, because that creates effective integration testing. So That's all we had. We just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your Friday here before the long weekend to join in this conversation. Thank you so much, Stephen, for coming in and being a wonderful guest. I really appreciate your insights and thoughts on this topic. Any other things you want to add?
It's been such an honor and a pleasure. I really was grateful to participate in this. Thank you all for letting me, speak and sharing some of the experiences that we've had in this particular domain, which I think is so, so important right now.
Yeah,
Awesome.
great job to both of you, and I absolutely agree. I mean, this is such a fundamental challenge of this, of this era, right? And actually having organizations crack some of these opportunities. Thanks so much to both of you. Great job. Always a pleasure to run these Copilot Chronicles with you, Will. To the audience, we will follow up with more contact information, more background, access to the recording, and probably a few other things I'm forgetting. But yeah, I think with that, we are about ready to wrap up. Thanks again, Will. Thank you, Stephen, for being here. Great to meet you.
Thank you. Yes, what a pleasure and right on time. Nice job, guys.
Have a
All right,
great
we're going to
weekend,
end things
everybody.
there. Sorry, Will.
I said have a great long weekend, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. You too. Yep. Bye.